This is Dan Dicks here reporting for Press for Truth with breaking news today. A huge victory has just been won in the UK courts in what is potentially a precedent-setting case all across the globe, and I certainly hope that will be the case. As we see here, a UK High Court disallows use of puberty blockers in children under 16. Keira Bell wins her case, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is Keira Bell. This young lady at the age of 14 started having these gender dysphoria ideas that she wants to maybe become a different sex than what she was born. She wants to try being a boy. She went to a couple of council meetings, and after just a few of those, by the time she was 16, they were already prescribing her on puberty blockers without her fully understanding the potential ramifications, the potential irreversible medical effects this is going to have on her body. And now she's well into her 20s. She's realizing she made a terrible mistake, and she wasn't capable of understanding some of the irreversible damages that were going to happen to her body. Like when you lower your voice like she did, there's no way of getting it back up to where it used to be. And more importantly, she's no longer able to have children. And this wasn't fully understood by her as a 16-year-old child. So the court has just ruled in her favor that they can no longer prescribe puberty blockers to children under the age of 16. Why is this important? Well, we've been covering this story in similar cases that have been going on here in Canada, where parental rights are under attack. As we see here, exclusive parent of transgender daughter now facing 30 to 45 days in jail for telling his story. And I've been covering the case of Rob Hoogland and his daughter, who's being put through the system of transitioning through the schools, to the counselors, to the hospitals, to the point of altering herself, and this is all against the father's wishes. The most recent interview I did with him was just a couple of months ago, continuing the crusade. Lawyer and father of trans daughter facing 45 days in jail speaks out. So guys, if you're not familiar with the Canadian case that I've been following that's similar to this, please check the links in the description below. Get caught up on these videos. It's incredibly important to understand that there is an agenda to brainwash children and to coerce and shape and mold them and push them into this direction of thinking that they are transgender. I mean, just look at this. A recent documentary from HBO called Transhood. Here we see a mother puts her 4-year-old son in a dress and reads him LGBT propaganda. You are literally watching her brainwash the child into thinking he's a girl. It's no mystery how children end up trans. This is it right here. And I would suggest, guys, a trans 4-year-old is just like having a vegetarian cat. Everybody knows it's the decision of the pet owner or the parent who actually holds that ideology, not the cat or the child. There's even clips of this which is incredibly cringe-worthy. I could barely watch the whole thing, but here they are at what appears to be a church service, pushing this child to publicly admit to being transgender. Again, we're talking about a 4-year-old.
Good morning. Today we choose to recognize, honor, love, and celebrate anyone here who would claim their identity publicly as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning, intersex, pansexual, asexual, or any category that I've left out.
Look at this poor child.
This is Phoenix.
This is such abuse. Tell them that you're trans. The kid's obviously
Do you want to tell your phone
a little
if you're a
disturbed.
boy or a girl?
Do you want to tell them if you're a boy or a girl?
I'm a girl. Okay, you can tell them that.
Okay. Phoenix would like you to know that she's a girl and she prefers she and her pronouns.
No. You prefer he, her, and she pronouns. You want your little boy to get up there publicly and say that he is a girl. This is child abuse, ladies and gentlemen. And there's a bigger agenda here that we can talk about as well. I posted this not long ago. We need to talk about Netflix normalizing pedophilia and the sexualization of children. And I did a rather big expose on that, which really is the bigger picture that needs to be talked about here, guys. So we're going to cover all of this stuff and much more in this video. But right before we do, I'd like to ask you to check us out here at pressfortruth.ca/donate. If you scroll down here, there's a tab to where you can contribute a one-time PayPal donation. You can contribute Bitcoin here or become a patron by clicking on that banner. You can also sign up for a monthly reoccurring amount at the Patreon alternative there. You can send an e-transfer to dan@pressfortruth.ca, or if you like to keep it old school, you can always send us cash, checks, equipment, or simply just words of encouragement. And you can do that here, Dan Dicks P.O. Box 1521, Squamish BC V8B 0B1. Links are located in the description below. All right, guys, let's talk about this potentially precedent-setting, groundbreaking case where Keira Bell has just won against Tavistock. This is such good news. Keira Bell won her case. It is now unlawful for clinics specializing in transgender affirmative health care to prescribe puberty blockers to children as a result of a landmark legal judgment handed down Tuesday, December 1st, 2020. Bell's case, which was heard in London's High Court, will have worldwide implications for the burgeoning trans healthcare industry, the profits of which depend on drawing growing numbers of children into the system. And indeed, guys, that's what this is all about, is getting the numbers to grow into this so-called system, this healthcare system, where it's being pushed heavily on trans children. I don't know if you know, in British Columbia, they have something called SOGI program in the schools. And this is flat out brainwashing the children to understand what transgender dysphoria means. And they're teaching this in we're talking the kindergarten level. I think it's up to grade 4. It's just sickening. And as I said, flat out child abuse to push these ideas upon a 4-year-old child. The forthcoming ruling in Keira Bell's case could reverberate worldwide. Evidence shows a massive increase in the number of girls, mostly lesbian, identifying as boys. Cross-sex hormones produce irreversible effects, often including in infertility. Keira Bell applied for judicial review of the Tavistock Gender Identity Clinic's policy of administering off-label prostate cancer drugs to children experiencing body dysmorphia for a wide range of reasons. Her case was based in her own experience. Here's a summary of the judgment. The treatment of gender dysphoric children has been wrestled away from the LGBTQ organizations. I stand in solidarity with all those adversely affected by this medical scandal. Heartfelt gratitude to Keira Bell. It goes on. Now that Bell's claim is successful, if subject to appeal, a further layering of safeguarding may be implemented so that gender identity medics must apply to the court for permission to arrest the pubertal development of distressed child. Tavistock is undoubtedly going to appeal. The clinic's standards of care with regard to children have been interrogated and found wanting. A panel of 3 High Court judges found that there were 9 elements required for a child to be deemed capable of informed consent. Now, here's where we get into things get a little bit tricky, because we're not necessarily clear in the water. They haven't exactly drawn that line in the sand at the age of 16. As you will see, there's still room for interpretation here. Meanwhile, it is still a step in the right direction. It says it found that it was highly unlikely that a child aged 13 or 14 or under would be competent to give consent to the administration of puberty blockers. It was also doubtful that a child aged 14 or 15 could understand and weigh the long-term risks and consequences of the administration of puberty blocking drugs. It found that the 9 elements could not be met in any child under the age of 16 due to the long-term consequences of the treatment. As such, the standards of care themselves have been deemed insufficient for the youngest children. The High Court states, a child under 16 may only consent to the use of medication intended to suppress puberty where he or she is competent to understand the nature of the treatment. Again, this gets into muddied waters territory. How do we determine if the 14 or 15-year-old child is capable of understanding the irreversible damages? That includes an understanding of the immediate and long-term consequences of the treatment, the limited evidence available as to its efficiency or purpose, the fact that the vast majority of patients proceed to the use of cross-sex hormones, and its potential life-changing consequences for the child. There will be enormous difficulties in children under 16 understanding and weighing up this information and deciding whether to consent to the use of public puberty-blocking medication. It is highly unlikely that a child aged 13 or under would be competent to give consent to the administration of puberty blockers. I don't like the words highly unlikely because that implies that sometimes it could be likely. It is doubtful, another language I'm not liking here, that a child age 14 or 15 could understand and weigh in on the long-term risks and consequences of the administration of puberty blockers. Here we see at the age of 14, Bell, who is seeking an explanation for her distress, said she wanted to be perceived as a boy. After 3 counseling sessions, clinicians at the Tavistock and Portman NHS Trust prescribed puberty blockers for her at the age of 16. At 17, clinicians prescribed wrong sex hormones, and at 20, she had a double mastectomy. When surgery came around, I thought of it as more of a practicality situation. I was sick of wearing my binder, Bell said. It was painful and an annoyance. I was unhappy with how my breasts looked, and even more so at that point than before. Bell subsequently came to regret those procedures, describing them as evil, and now enjoys being a woman. She no longer thinks of herself as trans, and she is concerned, however, that trans-affirmative medical experiments may prevent her from having children, and indeed they will, arguing that children cannot consent to being sterilized and the loss of sexual function. Her hope in bringing the claim was to protect other children from being subjected to the same irreversible harm, and she has succeeded in that laudable goal. And again, this is why this is so fantastic. We have cases here right now where we have similar 16-year-old little girl who very well may think again when she comes into her 20s and realize she made a terrible mistake. But all the time, why this father is trying to point that out to her, the courts are blocking him from being able to do so. So, as I said, this is a potentially precedent-setting case that I really hope spreads its ways all the way here to Canada. Miss A, who is also a claimant in the case, has a 15-year-old daughter who wants to undergo transformative procedures. She will not be able to begin that process until she reaches the age of 16, by which time it would be too late for puberty blockers to achieve the desired effect. Permanent deformation and restriction growth of developing secondary sexual organs in preparation for experimental plastic surgeries. As such, Miss A's daughter has been prevented from having her body irreversibly harmed in a manner that she stands a 90% chance of living to regret. So this is excellent news. The court also ruled that clinicians should apply to the court whenever there is doubt that the long-term interests of a 16 or 17-year-old would be served by the clinical interventions of blocking or wrong sex hormones. It is likely that the gender identity clinic, as the losing party, will appeal to the Supreme Court to defend their policy of performing sex change procedures on children. Nonetheless, the decision deals a decisive blow to the expanding pediatric trans healthcare industry in the UK. Also checking in with their insurers will be the NHS's Litigation Defense Fund. Providers of such healthcare worldwide will now be considering their options and whether they can afford the litigation risk of continuing to mutilate children's healthy bodies. The Tavistock Clinic argued that clinicians are able to assess which child's pubertal development needs to be arrested and which child's sexual development should be interfered with. Vanilla Morse QC, representing the NHS Trust, has argued that it was a radical proposal to suggest that children were incapable of informed consent to gender identity ideology-based medical procedures, which would render them sterile. What an insane person. The judge, thankfully, disagreed and drew a line against the practice. Gillet competence and the Montgomery criteria are the tests for whether or not a child can consent to ordinary medical treatment, which does not result in permanent damage without parental permission. If the medic considers that the child is mature enough to understand the implications of the treatment, parental rights can be overridden. So as I said, we're not in the clear here, guys, but this is indeed a step in the right direction. But as we see, this begs the question, how a child can know what it means to lose their future fertility and sexual function, a question to which the courts answered no. Since the 2000s, Tavistock has treated hundreds of children, some as young as 10, sometimes against their parents' wishes. The most commonly used blocker is tripolurine, a powerful drug licensed to treat advanced prostate cancer in men. This is used to chemically castrate male sex offenders and to halt precarious puberty. It's not licensed as a cure for a mental health condition known as gender dysphoria. Girls are particularly vulnerable to being drawn into this trans healthcare system. Get a load of these numbers, guys. In 2009, 40 girls under 18 were referred for gender identity ideology-based treatment in England. By 2017, this had multiplied to 1,800. Guys, from 40 to 1,800, prompting suggestions that social contagion was at play. And indeed, I think these numbers are clear of the transgender agenda that is taking place throughout society to, yes, condition and brainwash children into becoming transgender when they would have never had this idea on their own in the first place. Bell's claim is essentially an appeal for reproductive justice. It is the latest in a line of cases which began in 1976 with Loretta Ross, whose successful suit against the manufacturer of the contraceptive IUD, Dalkin Shield, which cost her her fertility, a risk known to the U.S. Center of Disease Control since 1973. So the global fight for women's health has a long history, from the Campaign Against the Contagious Diseases Act of the 1860s to the Irish survivors of symptotomy and the vaginal mesh scandal in the last decade. That girls are being sterilized before they are old enough to comprehend that loss will hopefully, if there is any justice, join that list. The decision of the court in favor of Bell has opened the way for clinical negligence claims by other children who have been harmed. Indeed, medical negligence specialists, it's hard to say with a guy with a bit of a lisp, medical negligence specialists are always accepting clients. Trans healthcare providers the world over and parents of children who think they are trans have a lot to think about, and indeed they do. So kudos to Keira Bell for taking it to the courts, you know, understanding that she was manipulated as a child. She was coerced into the ideas. Puberty blockers were pushed on her. Later in life, she realized she made a grave mistake. She doesn't want to be a boy. She enjoys being a girl. She was misinformed as a child. Now the UK courts have essentially ruled that they can no longer do that to children. As I said, there's a bit of a gray area there, a bit of muddy waters as to the interpretation of when a child can actually understand their consent here. But again, this is a huge step in the right direction. As I said, we are dealing with serious cases here in Canada, and that's why I hope this catches on worldwide for the sake of people like Keira Bell, who eventually learned that they made a huge, huge mistake. So please, guys, if you appreciate the information in this video, click that thumbs up button. Share this one. Again, this is good news. That this is standing up for parental rights and for the right of children not to be brainwashed, conditioned, and abused into literally castrating and mutilating themselves. So this is definitely a step in the right direction. Once again, guys, if you appreciate my efforts to bring you this information, please check us out here at pressfortruth.ca/donate. Links are located in the description below. And that's all for today, guys. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in. Stay tuned for more video reports coming soon. This is Dan Dicks reporting for Press for Truth. We all want truth. The truth will set you free.